Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Robert Swartwood here. Tonight, I'm joined by an author of several novels, including the instant cult classic Move Underground and the speculative thriller The Second Shooter, which I blurbed. It's a really good book. His short fiction has appeared in McSweeney's, Best American Mystery Stories, Tour.com, Fiction, and many other venues. He's also an anthologist. His latest is 120 Murders, dark fiction inspired by the alternative era, which we'll be discussing tonight. His fiction and editorial work has been nominated for the Hugo, World Fantasy LOCUS, and Bram Stoker Awards. That's right, it's your favorite writer and editor and mine, Nick Mamatas. Nick, how's it
Hello.
going?
Pretty good, thanks.
Hey, so before I forget, your 120 Murders on Amazon, if I click on your name, it takes me to a different, it's not linked to your like Amazon author page. It goes to a
Sure
different
is.
one.
That's right. We're sure. Yeah, yeah.
So just FYI, just, looking
Well, it turns
out.
out I hate Amazon, so it all works out. I have a bookstore. I want you to buy this book from Mr. and Mrs. YouTube and Mix YouTube.
Well, we will definitely talk about where people can buy the book.
That's right.
We can definitely talk about where people buy the book. But let's get started. We chatted before about your novels, and again, I want to focus this time more on the editing
Mhm.
and and sorry, I just had that email come in that we were discussing earlier. I gotta check it
Oh,
on this thing. But yeah, so basically, when did you start editing? Was that I guess there was editing the anthologies, obviously, but even before that, you were editing other stuff, correct?
yeah. It started off in the most real way with an acquaintance of mine from South Korea who was translating a book from the Korean into the English. I think this was his third language after Korean and Spanish. And he asked me to help him by rewriting and editing with him. That was my first editorial experience. And I parlayed that into working for Soft Skull Press, a small press that, which at the time was run out of a basement on Ludlow Street in the Lower East Side of Manhattan, and was a punk publisher. And they did sort of radical politics and the poets' novels and stuff about music and things like that. So I worked there for a couple of years. And from there, I then started, working with other things like doing small anthologies. I did one with Prime Books back in the old days called The Urban Bazaar, which
And
was,
and to be clear, this was the very first anthology you did.
yes.
How did that come
Yeah.
about?
Back many years ago, before the Bizarro genre started, it was just called Bizarre. And I'm always interested in anything that's sort of underground or a little out there or transgressive, and they seem pretty interesting. And I had started making my moves as a novelist, and Move Underground came out. Move Underground, for those who don't know, which is everyone except for a handful of people, is my first novel, which is Jack Kerouac, Neil Cassidy, and William S. Burroughs in a Lovecraftian world. And like I said, almost nobody read it, but every single human being who did read it ended up becoming a writer or publisher. It inspired them to waste their lives on this sort of thing. And it had made some waves in the Bizarro community, as it was called then, just Bizarre. And I had pitched to Carlton Mellick III this idea, and he was excited about it, but then he stopped being excited about it uh, for financial reasons. But I had these stories, and I had an idea, and Sean Wallace was interested in my work as well, and so we went with him, and that was the first anthology we did.
And so was that one that you edited with Sean, or this was just you as
No, he was
editor?
just Sean was just the publisher. He was just the guy in front of the Xerox machine pressing print on demand.
So it's kind of how it worked for Sean. So I mean, did you find it daunting? Or I mean, obviously you had done editing already. I mean, and here's the thing too, and I should also make it clear for a lot of people who are not aware, because oftentimes you'll see these anthologies edited by, and Nick, you can correct me if I'm wrong here. There are editors and then there are compilers.
Right.
And so you strike me more as an actual editor. And
Yes,
so,
correct.
yeah, can you maybe kind of explain kind of that difference?
Well, on one level, things have become a lot easier to become an anthologist, even though anthologies historically don't sell. But starting around 2006, they really started selling, thanks to John Joseph Adams, who innovated a new kind of anthology, the size of a phone book, mostly reprints, about a broad thematic topic. And I think his first one on zombies sold something like 500,000 copies. I remember knowing several of the people who were in that anthology. They got paid a penny a word for the little reprint about a zombie story. And a year and a half later, they all got $1,500 royalty checks, which is unheard of. It's heard of to get royalties, but not a four-digit royalty check from 1/69th of an anthology. So it sold many, many copies, clearly. And that showed bookstores, we can sell anthologies. All it needs to be is a broad theme and have a good value proposition, by which they mean big, because people buy books by the pound, sadly enough. And so I happened to start doing anthologies just before this new golden age where bookstores realized they can sell anthologies as if they were nonfiction. So people would walk into stores and say, "I love the Walking Dead. You got any things about zombies? I've been hearing about zombies all the time." And people would say, "Oh, in the bookstores, oh, how about this? It's full of zombies and it has all these people that you know and some people you don't know and it's a big bunch of stories." So they sold them almost like they were encyclopedia or nonfiction about some topic like zombies or steampunk or vampires or whatever. And at the same time, print-on-demand technology meant that you could a small press can do an anthology without having to put out a lot of money. It also meant that small presses get 15 people loving them, not just one. And it meant uh, that thanks to social media, people who were kind of fans could have instant access to a Robert Swartwood or a Josh Malerman or whoever was foolish enough to look at their DMs. And that meant that a lot of anthologies started coming out by people whose main interest in anthologies was that somebody famous could talk to them if they promised to pay them a few $100s. And that is why those are the compilers of anthologies. Meanwhile, an editor of an anthology may also ask their famous friends, but also be open to queries, and also turn down their famous friends, and also demand, edits and rewrites and revisions, and have even different criteria for stories. For example, with 120 Murders, my friend Molly Tanzer, whom I also co-edited an anthology with, is very good at the novelette length. So I told Molly Tanzer, "You can send me a 9,000 word story." Another writer said, "Oh, I heard the limit's 9,000 words." Says, "No, that's not the limit." But Molly, yeah, that's her limit. But it's not your limit because you're better at 4,000 words. So I want you to send me a 4,000 word story. And had Molly send me a 1,000 word story, being like, "What the hell is this? I wanted 9,000 words." And it's the same like anything else. Like that was, certain people you pick because they're good at a certain type of thing. This is why I'm chosen for anthology frequently, because I will find some weird angle that nobody else will think of.
Yeah. So
It's not because I'm so charming. It's not because I get by working on time. I just have that one little ability to turn a theme in a certain crazy way that fits in anthologies.
Speaking of Molly, so she co-edited an anthology with you, and you guys were kind enough to invite me into that one. It was called Mixed Up. It
Hmm.
was a very like unique anthology. Like, how did that? I mean, because like yes, you have done these anthologies that are very unique in theme. They aren't just a regular like, oh, here's another horror anthology or science
Yeah.
fiction anthology. Like, how did that one specifically come about?
Well, it's a tragic story, honestly. There was a cocktail recipe anthology with a literary theme called Tequila Mockingbird that sold some ridiculous number of copies. And it was all thematic cocktails with funny names, literary fiction names. And the cocktails were terrible. And I thought, if this thing can sell 500,000 copies, surely something with stories that are real stories from real writers and cocktails recipes could sell 1,000,000 copies. False. I was wrong again, Robert. Just like with my novel, I was wrong again. I thought, everyone who loves stories and everyone who loves cocktails will buy this. But nope, it is the intersection again who purchased it. Molly was a cocktail editor, And so all the recipes are hers and all that flavor text is hers. And I did for the most part the stories, and Molly chose and a couple of people as well to bring in. And it was very nice and really well done, but bookstores were very confused. You would think that people who work at bookstores or bookstore chains would be very interested in a book that is unusual, like you were saying, unique. But in fact, they were just confused. Like, where am book go? Am book cookbook? Am book storybook? Me no understand book. So that was the end of Mixed Up. Still available.
Where okay,
Plenty of
so
copies
where
around.
where did they typically, I mean, where did booksellers typically stock it or shelve it?
The intelligent ones put it in front by the register as a gift book.
Oh.
Because it was, as I would hang on one second, Mr. and Mrs. YouTube. I wish we know we were talking about this one. I'll be right back. Look at this beautiful book. Hardcover, has a bookmark, ribbon bookmark, interior illustrations, sort of line drawings, short stories from Carmen Maria Machado, Jeff Vandermeer. You might have heard of these people.
That's right.
Ben Percy, Kara Hoffman, Liz Hand. It's a good gift, right? Wouldn't you want this for Christmas? Wouldn't you, if you moved into your first house after years of apartment living, like some kind of subhuman animal, want to grow up a little bit and have this by your little wet bar? You would. You would, Robert.
And at the
So
very least,
they're
it's a
smart
great
ones.
bathroom book.
No, do not put this in your bath. Maybe
So,
Enemy of the State by Robert Schwartzwood over there can go in the bathroom.
so yeah, but that's too long. I mean, at least these were kind of like, short recipes and
Oh yeah,
short
they're all flash
stories.
fiction, right? But I guess what in your house you'd put it by your cookbooks or
Yeah.
by your bar or something like that.
Yeah.
So it's a gift book, and it should be in gift book sections, and should be because it's almost a impulse purchase.
And then real quick, just as an aside, in the green room, I was telling you my favorite editorial comment I ever got was from you for this book. It was a book that took place, if I remember correctly, during like Christmas time, and I had messed up A Christmas Carol and A Christmas Story, and you called it out and said the comment on the side in Word, "You dishonor us all, Robert."
That's right.
I still crack up when I see when I think of that. So no, I will say this. So I've only edited one anthology, and I kind of just fell into it. It kind of came about. It was for W. Norton, the Hint Fiction Anthology, which I had reprinted one of your stories because I
Mhm.
remember it was a very clever story. The complete title escapes me right now. I remember it's a very long title. What's the title?
Found wedged in the desk drawer in Paris, France, 25 December 1989.
Yes. Yes, perfect. And so for me, at least, the publisher really, I was kind of the one I guess prerequisite they had was
Mhm.
I had to get a certain number of like big famous authors
Mhm.
to, I guess for them to feel it more marketable
Mhm.
for booksellers. Have you ever had that with any of the anthologies where they,
You know,
you
I
had
think
the
that's quite
publisher?
overblown, as a matter of fact, honestly. I think that people hear that and people do get big names in their anthologies because they do wish to sell more copies, but I don't think it's necessary. Certainly, it is certainly not necessary to make a good anthology.
Yeah.
Ellen Datlow, who I worked with on Haunted Legends, another anthology that of true ghost stories, another concept I came up with of true ghost stories written by real writers as opposed to the local lunatic who waves a stud finder around the haunted house to find ghosts or something. Has always said, you don't need big names, you just need a solid idea and solid stories. And that is perhaps commercially more true if you're Ellen Datlow with a 40-year track record. But I think theme and variety sell better than big stories because ultimately anthologies are purchased by people who enjoy reading short fiction. And people who love Stephen King might pick up a book but very, very confused or very upset even. But they're smart. This is not a Stephen King book. Who's these other people? What are they doing in there? You might even see occasionally, very occasionally on Goodreads, which authors and editors should not read. But people do screen cap them and put them on social media. You'll see people going, this novel was very confusing. The chapters did not connect to each other. I didn't understand what was going on. Why were all these writers involved? Did they even read each other's work? They don't understand that it's, like the Bible, different authors are involved somehow. It's a library, but so no, I don't think big names are necessary. Though of course they can't hurt.
Yeah. Well, again, for mine, the publisher basically demanded it. That was part
Mhm.
of the deal. And again, that was the anthology of very, very, very short stories, and we were
Yes.
able to pack over like 100 stories in it. So it wasn't like I only had, 15, 20 slots. So well, let's
And
talk about
Norton
the one
doesn't
that
know, right? Norton doesn't know either. Norton does not have another universe where you didn't get big names and it sold worse.
yeah,
What it's only their intuition, their hunches about how things might work. It's like folk wisdom.
very true. I mean, I don't think ultimately people were buying it because, there was a Joyce Carol Oates story in it or
That's right. Yeah,
Hodgin. Like it was just the concept of an anthology
exactly.
of
The intrigue.
25 words or fewer stories.
In
But
fact, if I remember correctly, the Washington Post reviewed that book, and David Ulin, I think is his name, said that my story was his favorite, and then he reprinted the entire story.
and you didn't could now
In
can you say
his
that
New Washington
your
Post.
can you say that your work has been published in the Washington Post?
Even when my next novel came out after that, I wrote to him saying, "Hey, do you want to review this? I'm your favorite little hidden fiction guy. Do you want to review my book?" Not crickets and tumbleweeds. Not a thing from that guy after he reprinted my story in full.
So this is when you need to create a different email address and email
Mhm.
them as your publicist.
Ah, yes, that's right.
And so yeah, we'll
Big
we'll work on a
Mamatas on the case.
we'll work on a time machine later to go back and do that. So was the Ellen Datlow was that the first anthology that you did that you co-edited?
No, I think I co-edited a book with Jay Lake first. The late Jay
Okay.
Lake, a science fiction writer who was died young, sadly, and is greatly missed. There was a preoccupation with the phrase slipstream when I first started writing or first started publishing. It was the first draft of science fiction and fantasy writers who had sort of literary MFA backgrounds. Well, maybe not quite the first, but maybe the first to fill a generation. Let's put it that way. And they were very confused about the greasy, skiffy, libertarian Heinleinian business. So they said, "Oh, we're slipstream. We're slipping between mainstream and fantasy." And so to kind of make fun of it, I coined the phrase "spicy slipstream stories." And I told that to Jay Lake, and he was co-working with a woman named Deborah Lane with Wheatland Press, a small press that was going to do it, and they dropped it. I think they ended up shutting down, but we found a home for that Lethe Press, Steve Berman's press out of New Jersey. It took a couple years, and that came out. And that was a small press book that does as well about small press books too, but it was a lot of fun and very sexy as because it's spicy stories. And I enjoyed the work on that as quite a bit. But then I was a member at the time of the Horror Writers Association, and they put out a call for anthology ideas. So they have a history of putting out anthologies with big publishers. And I had this idea of true ghost stories, like your local ghost story that you might hear about some haunted house or the haunted bar in your town. But instead of being written by the local folklorist or the local true believer, what if real writers wrote them? And they love the idea, the HW said, but you're not famous, so you can't do it. Can you find a famous person to do it with you? And I asked Ellen, and she was interested. She very rarely works with other people
Yeah.
outside of, I think, Terry Wilding, which she worked for many years with several anthologies, but also that year's best horror and fantasy brick of a annual reprint anthology. And then she said, "Oh, fantastic. Of course, you'll use our agent who takes 20% because we're an organization. And of course, we need 50%. And you can only use HWA members. And we want you to use these four." And so we would have ended up doing the work for free. So then said, "Never mind that. Well, I'm going to go right to Tor and my editor at Tor, and we're going to get a deal." And we got one. And then Robert Jordan, the fantasist, died. As it turns out, that Wheel of Time thing was keeping the lights on at Tor. So for about a year and a half, we heard like nothing. If you call tour at the time, exaggerating, they'd be like, "Oh, Robert Jordan's dead. Call us back." That would be the kind of response you'd get from tour books. But finally, it came out, and it did pretty well, and it got nominated for a number of awards. Like half of that list you read at the beginning, where it was because of Haunted Legends. It was a Shirley Jackson nominee, World Fantasy nominee. Several stories were also nominated, which I think is the proof of it. How could the best anthology not have any good short stories in it? And it
Mhm.
won the Bram Stoker Award. Came out in Russian, came out with an audiobook. A few years ago, we released it finally as an ebook. We lucked out, lucked out. I will constantly be putting quotes around everything I say, Robert, because it came out just when the big publishers were trying to get the ebook rights at the same time with the paperback and the hardcover. But we didn't give them the ebook rights. We were able to keep that, but they didn't want them. They didn't want to spend more money to get them. But we were only able to put it out a couple of years ago, and now that is available for everyone. Sadly, as always, because it's one of my projects, Tora Books was waiting on this book because Robert Jordan had died, and turns another famous person was approaching the end of his life, Richard Matheson. And so there was a tribute volume to Richard Matheson. It was called He Is Legend. And our book is called Haunted Legends. And his book had a shadowy figure on the cover. And our book had a shadowy figure on the cover. And his book had a sepia spine. And our book had a sepia spine. And both these books were on the same slide for the PowerPoint presentation for Barnes& and Noble at the time, Borders Books and Books A Million and Hudson Booksellers. But speaking of big names, He Is Legend had a little secret weapon, which was that Joe Hill had released his first author photo at the time. And what did you know? Who does Joe Hill resemble? His father, Stephen King. And they co-wrote something for this Matheson book. So now, Robert, put yourself in the shoes of the guy who's in charge of Barnes& and Noble. Which one of these do you buy 5,000 copies of? Which one of these do you buy 50 copies of? Your goal is to keep your job. What's it going to be? They came out the same day.
So it in my mind they screw it up and they buy yours instead, thinking it's the other one.
No, if only. Nope, nope, nope. So we had what they call the split run. So the hardcover and the paperback came out at the same time. Paperback for the stores in the hope that it being less expensive would move some copies. Hardcover for the collectors and the libraries. And I think Tor lost money on that book, but I made some money because we got the Russian money and the ebook money and the audiobook money thanks to Ellen's agent, who managed to keep money away from Tor. Because usually, if you sell something, it goes to the advance first, but not with the way her contract works.
Yeah.
So Ellen's great to work with, partially because she has good ideas, partially because she knows everybody, partially she's a good editor, but also she's got a very clever agent.
So did you was the initial contract with those writers for ebooks, or like when you did an ebook, did you have to go back to you know what I mean? Like for the publisher, did you have those like contract wise? Because the earlier anthologies, obviously pre-ebooks, might not have had that language in there for, to use this in digital form or whatever.
Sure. And I think we did go over it again, but it was very simple. We just added a line to the pre-existing contract. And of course, it was years later. So people had already put out their own stories on their collections. Maybe it was on a podcast or reprinted it, some other place. It had been like 10 years.
Yeah.
And so we only wanted them on exclusively again. So why not one more non-exclusive bit of rights for this ebook? And of
Yeah.
course, Ellen Datlow has done many, many anthologies, and she's also the other good thing she's good at that I'm terrible at is keeping good spreadsheets. And so let's say you have stories in 4 or 5 Ellen Datlow anthologies, which I do. You'll get royalties from each of them, like $1 here, $1 there, $1 whatever, and they pile up. And every 18 months or so, you'll see people on social media go, "Oh, I just got $70. Wow!" And
Yeah.
so many of the people in Haunted Legends are Datlow stalwarts, Datlow perennials. So they know the score. They know if this comes out again, they might get $73 in 18 months, not just $70
Yeah.
from the piling together of the small royalties.
Yeah, I would just say for full transparency, for the anthology that I did, I just decided to pay everybody a flat fee,
Same here, because I
because
can't.
it.
not keep that shit up. Although
I
I
mean,
did
it was
find
100.
out,
It was like I think like at least 120 authors. I would have had to, and I mean, split. It's that
exactly.
would be insane.
Yeah, it's not worthwhile for anyone to do that. Yeah.
Yeah. So I haven't really, I'm not really, hip with the current small press scene right now in the horror sci-fi
Mhm.
category. Are charity anthologies still a thing?
Rarely.
Because those used to be like it seemed like every anthology coming out or every other anthology coming out was a charity, which to
Sure.
me it was this way of being like, oh, I'm going to do an anthology, but I don't want to pay anybody,
Mhm.
so we're going to do it this way.
And you can't criticize me, otherwise you hate children, or you hate the starving, or you love cancer. It was also a way to immunize oneself from criticism. Of course, people do this all the time whenever somebody awful does something awful online, they say, well, why don't we have a fight for charity, or why don't we gather money for charity, and to try to protect themselves. And
Yeah.
also, all of these charity anthology, we're not connected to these charity at all. The idea was just, well, I'll find a PayPal donation page or button somewhere and randomly send them some dough. So it's not as common as it once was. And there have been a couple of good ones. I think toward one of someone, there was a big tsunami, and was it Thailand? Maybe 13 years ago.
Yeah.
But no, that was also another way to get big names, because like if you're a big name, Robert, look at all your books behind you. I said, Robert, come on, do you want to give me one more story? You're like, no, I'm too rich and famous. But it's for puppies. They're being thrown. They're being thrown into wood chippers by Barron Trump. Don't you want to put a stop to this?
And
Now you
just
feel
for
bad,
a
right?
legal note, we have no proof that Barron Trump has thrown any puppies in wood chippers as of right now.
And
Yeah,
even if he
okay.
could,
Let's.
our book cannot stop him. He's unstoppable.
So okay, so the anthologies, and you mentioned before the one you did with Molly, she did like the recipes, you did the fiction side. Well, like with Jay and with Ellen and any other people that you have done more just straight fiction anthologies. Like what? I mean, I guess everybody has a little bit more of a collaborative.
Mhm.
I mean, it's one thing to just like edit an anthology yourself, but then when you're editing it with somebody else, obviously you're. I mean, I don't know. Like, what was that experience like? I mean, do you enjoy kind of doing the co-editing?
Yeah, because I enjoy doing half the work and putting my name on a book. But what you're asking really is there a conflict with the other editors, with the other editor, right? And there can be, but I guess I developed something, and I don't know if other people do this. I'm sure they must do something similar, where everybody has one veto and everyone has one unvetoable decision. So if let's say you and I were making an anthology together and you brought in some story that I could not stand, I could veto it. No questions asked. But you also could say, I have one decision that you cannot veto. And it could be to save that story, to save a second story, to have some other idea. And that is usually sufficient to resolve any problems. I don't think I've ever used the veto or that sort of thing, but people feel better when they have it because they know there's an alternative to strife.
Yeah.
And then either you can do it based on word count or just based on enjoyability. And obviously people want. I grew up on Ellen Datlow. I got a subscription to Omni magazine when I was 10 years old. Way too young. Omni magazine by the publishers of Penthouse was very sexy, nipples all over the place, really strange ideas, really mind-blowing. I cannot imagine my 11-year-old reading Omni. He would not be interested, one. But two, he would just go, what the heck is this? I showed him an episode of The Simpsons last week. And he's like, is this cartoon for children? He was terrified. He was shocked by the Itchy and Scratchy show. I was like, why are they doing this? Oh my gosh. But I grew up on Ellen's stuff. One of the earliest books I ever got, and what made me help fall in love with short fiction, was the first Omni book of short stories, which collected many of the things from Omni. Another one was a collection by Kit Reed, who was in Haunted Legends and who I was very pleased to get to know later in her life, called Other Stories and Attack of the Giant Baby, which also, short stories are amazing. And Reed is one of the Dotlow stalwarts as well, I'd say. And so I grew up reading these people, and it was so thrilling to work with them that of course, I ended up with similar taste. And I have similar age to Jay Lake, so we had similar taste. And I also worked with my supervisor at Viz Media back when I worked at Viz Media. Her name was Masumi Washington. And then we had a different split where our anthologies, the Futures Japanese, Phantasm Japan, and the Hanzai Japan. Hanzai is the Japanese word for crime or for disreputable political activities, were Japanese stories from Japanese authors and non-Japanese writing in sort of the Japanese idiom or Japanese setting. And so in that case, he was primarily, Masumi would find the Japanese work and I would find the non-Japanese work.
Do you ever over request stories for
Oh,
anthology?
of
Because I
course.
remember there was one you had invited me to, and ultimately I just couldn't come up with anything worthwhile, and I felt really bad, but I didn't want to write something shitty, you know what I mean? And either so like, and I feel like that's probably happens where you kind of have an idea that, obviously not everybody you invite is going to be either available or they'll have anything worthwhile.
Yeah. So you always overwrite and you always continually invite. And what should also be open to queries, which is apparently controversial. Back when we started, Robert, he was not controversial. Everybody understood that you could always send a query letter. And if you heard nothing, that's a no. If you got a no, that's a no. But maybe you'll get a yes. Apparently, these days, querying is apparently rude. And you know what's not rude? Going on Twitter or Blue Sky and saying to somebody, hey, are you going to open submissions or what? That's not rude. Because maybe I've got something for you. Oh, maybe you do? I don't think you do. That apparently is fine. To go up to somebody and say, why don't you quintuple your workload for no reason? Or you're a racist. It's fine. But P.S. We're both white somehow, but somehow I'm the racist. That's okay. But querying somebody's unheard of. But I accepted many queries, even for this book, 120 Murders. I didn't take all of the stories. And some of the queries were not legit, honestly. Like, oh, I have some famous musician friends. Do you want to hear from them? I've also got a story. That's not quite a good query. Maybe my famous friend will write you a story is not quite a good query.
Yeah.
But Jeffrey Ford, one of my favorite writers, I didn't ask him to participate in 120 Murders because I thought he would not be into the music. And I was right. But he was into writing a story and he had a story. He's like, oh, Nick, can I show you a story? I'm like, well, you, Jeffrey Ford, can show me a story whenever you like. And it was a wonderful story. And then I wrote him back saying, okay, here are three songs. Which one do you want to pretend to like for this anthology? And that is why there's an entirely made up author's note about I was on the couch taking a TV break watching Black Flag's TV party when my wife came in and yelled at me. None of this ever happened. I don't know if he made it through the song, but it's a beautiful story.
So yeah, well, let's talk about the new anthology. You have the copy there. You want to hold it up for people
I
to
sure
see?
do.
Ooh, look at that. So how did this one, yeah, tell us about how this, like this idea that, I mean, I'm assuming obviously this is all you, or was this the publisher came to you, or
Oh,
how
it
did
was
it come
me.
about?
Some years ago, Joe Clifford, a local acquaintance of mine, put out a short fiction anthology of crime stories, crime and noir, tribute to Bruce Springsteen, and that's sort of a little trend. And there are many. There's one for Wu-Tang Clan. There's one for Steely Dan. I happen to have a story in one for Warren Zevon, who I like very much. And frankly, they've gotten a little ridiculous. Show tunes, one-hit wonders, Paul Simon. These stories, may be very good, but it seemed to be going for smaller and smaller audiences at each time. So I thought, why don't we have a big one where it's a whole era? And I love music. I never really had much vinyl or many CDs, but I loved the radio. I loved Left of the Dial, college radio. And living in New York, I had access to plenty of stuff on Long Island, in the city, out in Jersey, Connecticut, and that was pretty mind-blowing. Of course, there was cable came at the time. You had shows like Night Flight on the USA Network, 120 Minutes on MTV. So it was really a good time to sort of dip your head in and hear interesting new music. And it's also the case that when people enter their late 40s and early 50s, which is the people who grew up on that music are now doing, they tend to start reading mysteries and crime stories, even they didn't previously. And they tend to have a few bucks. So they'll do things like actually buy books and not just vape them or whatever kids do. And so that was my idea. We're going to do crime fiction about everything. As it turns out, once again, Robert, I'm a fool. I'm a buffoon. I'm a moron. Because almost every publisher that does crime anthologies does it only in-house. They don't want any idea they ain't got. Who sent you? Nobody. We don't want nobody sent. And then some other genius wrote to me saying, "Oh, Nick, I'm doing an anthology. Want to be in it?" I said, "Sure, I want to be in it." And he said, "I'm doing my own company." Oh, wow, that's exciting. Do you think Ellen Datlow will want to work with me? I think I want to work with you first. Why don't you work me up to Ellen Datlow? And so we were off to the races. And that publisher, which is now called Ruadan Books, is more of a dark speculative publisher. So not exactly just crime and noir, but some fantasy and some cyberpunk as well. So I expanded the process a little bit to open it up to more supernatural things and to other metaphysical themes. And then we were off to the races. And he was a new publisher, so there was the usual bumps of new publisher business. That's part of the Amazon business. It can be hard to upload things properly sometimes. But at the same time, he was very interested in building an audience for the publisher and for the book to the extent that we did a lot of pre-orders. I wrote a story that's not in the book, but if you pre-order the book, you would get the story immediately, which solves one of the problems of anthologies when writers do it. And we ended up having about 700 pre-orders, which is a very large number of books sold directly to the customer that the
And
publisher
for an
keeps all the
anthology,
money. Yeah,
small press anthology, yeah, it's great.
yeah. I mean, many small press anthologies do that for their lifetime, much
Right.
less through one venue where the publisher keeps all the money and it works out for everybody. And so my
So
story, Shriek of the Week, is now out on Tough Magazine. Anyone can read it now. But as you know, it's considered not good to put your own story in an anthology.
yeah, well, let's have a conversation about that. That was something that had come up. I was at AuthorCon a couple weeks back. There was a whole panel about the Stan anthology coming out. Brian Keene and Chris Golden were talking about that, and that was one of the things that had come up because and Brian had mentioned, he came up with that mindset where if you're an editor, you do not put your stories in the anthology. I remember when I did Hidden Fiction, I was told by certain writers, you better make sure you put your own, stories in your, and your stories are the best. And for me, I was, it's like it's not about me. It's
Right.
about the book. Like what serves the book, what's going to be better for the readers. Now, I did kind of sneak in a story in the intro I did, like the
Yes.
very first Hidden Fiction story I did. But like, I mean, how has that been for you? And I guess what are your thoughts about that? Where, I mean, I guess here's the thing too. You know, I understand too, from a publishing standpoint, where like, um, well, he's the first writer that comes to mind. I know he's not a good example right now, but Neil Gaiman had done an anthology, and it's like he had to put his story in there because that was going to help sell,
Sure.
copies for the anthology. So there's,
I usually
so I
say
understand that.
George R. R. Martin or Ramsey
There we go.
Campbell.
All right, we'll cut that out.
What can
We'll cut
change
that
that
out.
up in the
But
future? Right, Robert?
But anyway, because I was like, well, Stephen King's never going to edit an anthology, but I mean, he did do, an intro or whatever. But like, yeah, I mean, so there are certain times where a big name author is going to, behoove the anthology and the publisher to have that person include a story of theirs in
Yeah,
the
of course. I
anthology.
mean, there are people who don't read a lot of anthologies, but they love George R. R. Martin, and they'll be disappointed if George R. R. Martin presents George R. R. Martin's 17's Best Friends and not George R. R. Martin.
Yeah.
Or Ramsey Campbell. I love Ramsey Campbell's short fiction. If I pick up a book of anthology with Ramsey Campbell editing it, I do want to see a Ramsey Campbell story in it. However, as we were talking about, many anthologists are one, either not great writers. I mean, Ellen Datlow's not a writer. She just never would try to put in a story of her own or even write a story anymore. But others in that milieu of people who are publishers because they fell down at the grocery store and broke their ankle on a grape and said, my ankle. And the guy comes out and gives them a settlement check. They're ready to put their own story in a book. I am generally skeptical, but of course I've done it myself. I did it with Mixed Up. There's a story for me in Mixed Up. That is there. And maybe this is a terrible excuse. I'm a terrible person. You throw me in front of a bus, but maybe it's a good idea. So it was confusing anthology. People were confused by it, by the uh, pitch. So to illustrate the pitch, I wrote a story and put it in the anthology's proposal. So they could see what I meant by flash fiction, so they can see how the cocktails integrated into it. And the ultimate publisher liked that story enough to say, please make sure you put that story in there. With Haunted Legends, my agent at the time, who was a colleague of Ellen Datlow's agent, they both worked at Writer's House. She said, "Don't you want your own story in there?" I'm like, "No, no, I mustn't. I can't do it," because I knew that would not be appropriate. For this story, for this one, now I am at a position in 2025, after 25 years of publishing, that there are a relatively small handful of people who will buy anything that has my name on it. I don't know who they are. I don't know how they get their money. I imagine it's some kind of welfare program or uh, metal detection on the beach somehow. Maybe
Uh,
because I don't know how they do it, but somehow there are a couple hundred people who will buy anything that I put out, which is great. I love them so much. I'm glad I don't know their names or their faces, but I love them. And so the question came up, well, how do we get people to pre-order via a new publisher? Because Rewilding was untested. It wasn't they're not like Cemetery
right.
Dance gonna give them money. So I said, why don't I write a story that's satisfying both sets of customers? The people who are suspicious of somebody putting a story in their own anthology will be pleased to know no story here. You will never be assaulted by my prose if you buy this book. Just the prose of Sylvia Marina Garcia, Paul Tremblay, Meg Gardner, Maxim Jakubowski, all these famous people. Excellent short story, Josh Merriman. But if you are a hardcore Mamatas stan and somehow you came up with $16, don't tell me how, I don't want to hear it, and bought the book in advance, we'd send you a nice looking PDF of a story by me. And that sort of satisfied both, I won't say halves, because it's probably like this is the small group of people who want my story, and here's the potential audience of 120 Murders. So both portions of the audience were satisfied in this way.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that honestly, I mean, as writers, we are constantly saying pre-orders are very important. Please consider pre-ordering, blah blah blah. Having that incentive, I think, is very important. I've actually had a conversation with an author not that long ago because he has a new book coming out, and we were talking about different ideas to just try to incentivize. Because just asking them to pre-order, 9 times out of 10, a lot of readers, and I mean, I fall into this too, where I know that even though pre-orders are very important, I'm still like, I'll just buy it when it comes out.
Yeah,
So I
yeah,
try to
yeah.
kind of do better with, trying to pre-order stuff that I definitely want to read. But yeah, I mean, incentives, and that's a whole other conversation for another time. So what about the layout when you're laying out the stories? Now, I will say again, just I have very limited experience when I did the Hint Fiction Anthology. I had, 125 stories. I remember actually I had them printed out as little kind of almost like note cards, and I had them laid on the floor.
Mhm. Yeah.
And I don't know if people really, who read the anthology really get this, but in many ways, I wanted the stories to kind of flow into
Mhm.
each other, and it was broken up into three different parts. So, like, there was like a structure to it. I mean, so when you are typically doing an anthology, I mean, you're not just like compiling, in alphabetical order, or I mean, like, how are you deciding, okay, this is my lead story? I mean, maybe talk about that, like, had like the importance of the very first story in the anthology, and the last story.
Well, the old rule of thumb is start strong and long, which doesn't mean that the last story is the weakest. It just means it's the meatiest. So as I mentioned, The Best in Basement Radio by Riley Tanner is the longest story because I knew I wanted to have a long story in the back. For the first story, I chose Kara Hoffman's How Soon Is Now, which is inspired by the Smiths song of the same name. And it is a beautiful, very short story, maybe 1,000 words. It is elegiac. It is very interesting. It kind of tantalizes in a way that the beginning of any book should. So I felt that it was very strong for the beginning. Had I put it in the middle, it would have been lost, honestly, because it is so slim. It would have been like a sorbet as opposed to an amuse-bouche. So you want to have something sharp and interesting at first, but in the middle, it would have just been a transition point between two longer stories. I also have all these little rules that aren't really, maybe they don't mean anything, but I like to use them. I don't want to have two first-person stories in a row, if I can help it, because I don't want there to be any confusion between the eye of one story and the eye of another story. I try to go back between uh, small and large, short, long and short. I try to avoid, not always successfully, um, different the same theme clicks to each other because crime, noir, dark fantasy are huge, but there are set pieces and what we call tropes or motifs. And then, of course, because that's what makes something a genre. This idea of this furniture that you can use and rearrange. So I did my best to keep away the two stories, one by William Boyle, one by Veronica Shones, that are both take place in Brooklyn. Both involve a young woman running away to Manhattan after killing somebody. I said, "Oh, I hope they can't be together." Although at one point I thought, should I write to William and tell him that at one point his character should look up and see this other girl? And should I tell Veronica the same thing? I decided against it. Maybe next time. So I try to avoid that. And in general, I try to avoid stories that end with a first single sentence paragraph, which is everyone's cheap trick to end a story. And sometimes it's very powerful. It's a powerful way to end a story, but if everyone does it, it's very exhausting. And it is certainly like a reflex that many people use to do it. So I definitely wanted to keep those to a minimum, number one, and two, definitely not have two of those stories together next to each other.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
This is
once you have
why
all those things
you,
in place, that solves like 80% of your problems.
yeah. Yeah. I
And the
mean,
other 20% is finding support. Yeah,
and again, this is why you're an editor, not a compiler, which again, a
that's right.
compiler is basically someone who's just, they don't think about these things. They're just, shuffling things into a Word doc or a PDF and then just kind of going from there.
Yeah. Even as a consumer, I love anthologies, but I will certainly find one in the store and I'll flip through it. And if I see a bunch of single sentence paragraphs ending a bunch of stories, it goes right back on the shelf. It's not worth my time as a reader, I don't think.
So, so, what is, I don't know, like, is there anything else you wanted to talk about specifically about this anthology before we get to your upcoming novel that's coming out later this year?
Yes, I wanted to tell people to avoid Amazon.com.
All right, there we go.
Buy anywhere else. BarnesandNoble, Books A Million. My own preference is for East Bay Booksellers, which is a local store next to me, that I will go there and sign the book. And I'll also do anything you want to the book on its way to you. So if you want a special message or genetic materials or highlighted passages, whatever you want, just put it in the note and I'll make sure it gets to you. So you'll have, you'll help me out. You'll help out this bookstore, which is a great bookstore, which recently burned to the ground last year. So now they're in a new bookstore, a new store, which is much smaller. It was, I think, a shoe store previously or something along those lines. And it was in the fancy area of Oakland, so that shoe store might have had like 5 shoes in it. You ever been to one of those little stores with just like one shoe on a pedestal? It's like one of those. Now it's books. So you can help this guy out. He is East Bay Booksellers has been nominated for Independent Bookstore of the Year by Publishers Weekly. Just now, just this morning or yesterday morning.
Oh,
So
wow.
they're next door. They got a lot of things going on there. It'd be great to help them out, help me out. For ebooks, I highly recommend Waitlist Books. Get it? Like there's no wait to the book because all that electrons. That is run by Gavin Grant and Kelly Link. Kelly Link is a famous author. And they also run a bookstore called Book Moon in Massachusetts. And they have a very carefully curated selection of ebooks, ebook magazines in the field of fantasy, science fiction, horror. And it would be wonderful to support them. And if you buy it from Waitlist Books, you actually own an ebook. It's yours. It's not yours until Jeff Bezos says you don't own it. And I know people from Kindle. I know I had this one friend, acquaintance of mine, who ended up buying my ebook for Bullet Time, my 2012 novel, 3 times. Because the first time he bought it, it vanished. Second time he bought it, it was like broken somehow. Now it's out with a new publisher, the same publisher who does Haunted Legends, and now he has it, kind of finally. But who knows what Bezos will do next, or what some algorithm will do next. But with Waitlist Books, it is your book to keep and to send to somebody else. And then, if you want to send it to somebody else, I don't care.
Yeah.
Don't make a website for it saying free book, suck it down to everybody. But if you want to send it to your friends too, it's fine, please do. Yeah.
So what do you find? Do you think of yourself more as an anthologist or a writer or an editor?
The good question. I also get this like, are you a science fiction writer or a horror writer? Are you do crime writer? So it's really what I'm doing at that moment. So am I an anthologist? Not right now. Was an anthologist on April 7th, the day before this book came out? Yes.
What
But
do you
now am I
enjoy?
in mode, huh?
What do you enjoy? I mean, do you find yourself enjoying one over the other?
This is be weird because this is going to be the segue into talking about the novel, but I'm a pretty disinterested novelist, to be honest with you. I wake up in the morning with an idea. It's usually an idea for a short story, not an idea for a novel or for a series or for a character that I'll want to spend the next 20 years writing about. And to be perfectly blunt about it, most novelists also wake up with ideas for short stories. They just won't stop writing a novel. But if you hand me the average commercial novel, I could definitely remove 45,000 words from it with no problem as an editor. So
Yeah.
sometimes I'm an editor when I'm a reader. Who did this? Nobody. Let me take care of this right away. We do not need this scene where they take a sip and it goes down their throat and they feel better about themselves and they take another sip of water. Forget that. What's going on? But it just depends on what I'm doing at the time. I like making books. And so for me, having the 9 novels and the 7 anthologies and a couple of collections and the nonfiction books here and there is all the same. It's the same project of the Nick Project.
Yeah.
And that's true of genres too, whether I'm doing horror or science fiction or experimental fiction or writing an essay.
Well, real quick, let's talk about just your freelance editing. I mean, when you take on a project, um, you are, I mean, I've known you for a very long time, and I think you had even were kind enough to read one of my stories once where I don't want to say necessarily you tore it apart, but you were very, very honest, which I appreciate in terms of like, this is what's good. All the rest of this is not, you know what I mean? Like, I mean, how do you, I don't know, like, obviously, and that's a weird thing too, where I feel like a lot of people, like no one goes to editing school. No
Right.
one, like no one gets a degree to be a book editor. It's oftentimes a lot of different things. So like, what is your approach or just your view in terms of like editing, not only I guess yourself, but like just other people's stuff?
So it's true, and you basically learn by doing it. When people ask me, how do you become an editor? I suggest that you have to start editing. Like do a little project, do a little zine, do a little pamphlet. Work at a small press magazine, reading the slush for a few months. Not forever,
And that's the thing
six
I always
months,
tell
brain
people, like
damage.
slush.
Yeah.
Yeah, like I always feel like
Weren't
slush.
you? You
I
were.
like
What was that guy? That guy Jack, and he had that book in
Jack
New York.
Fisher,
What was his
Flesh and
name?
Blood magazine.
That's right.
I was a senior editor there, which I think just meant that I had kind of been there longer than the other editors. I have
That's
no idea what
right.
it meant. But reading Slush, I always tell people if you're like a new aspiring writer, if you can read Slush, it will open your eyes.
I say 6 months. 6 months in one day, permanent brain damage. Useless. But 6 months, you'll learn a lot, as you did. Look at you now.
Yeah.
But
And I don't know if you agree with this, but I mean, it got to the point where you could tell by the first page, sometimes like the first
absolutely,
paragraph, if a
absolutely, you can
story
tell
was worth reading.
yeah, you can tell from the shape of a page. If you just sort of zoom out and see how the paragraphs go, you can tell because the paragraph is a unit of meaning in English. Imagine going back to the whole idea of the single sentence paragraph. Imagine one sentence that is one word long. I do this in my classes. The word is soldiers. You can imagine on a page on a line by itself, soldiers. What does that mean? How many soldiers are there? More than immediately apprehendable. Is the observer of these soldiers happy to see them? No. Were the soldiers walking up slowly? No, it's a surprise. You can just tell from the negative space around the word soldiers a lot about these soldiers. And getting that, understanding how the page works, can only be transmitted by reading a lot of pages, thus via slash or by being a very prolific reader of short fiction of all sorts and being very open to diverse sources. Of course, I am referring to like diversity in race, diversity in gender, diversity in sexualities, diversity in nationalities, diversity in class position, but also in reading everything. I don't read a lot of romance, but I've read some romances. I try to read the best 3% of every genre out there, which is different than reading the 3% bestsellers of every genre out there. And when I was working in a bookstore, I'd read the first 20 pages of almost anything that looked interesting. So, oh, let me take a look at my break, or I'll read 20 pages of this, 20 pages of that, just see how the structures worked. And that's how I developed my editorial sense. I am also a far more commercial editor than I am a writer. All these tales of woe are about publishing promise, but ultimately, as a writer of novels, my novels aren't very commercial because I'm interested in certain concepts and certain forms that aren't immediately saleable to an algorithm or to a major bookstore. But to that core of readers, that to the 25,000 people who read 50 or more books a year, that's my audience as a writer. Being my editorial work means I can do that. I love, and I have loved for a long time, the record label Project Records, which is run by a guy named Sam Rosenthal. And Rosenthal actually produces most of the records on Project. But they all sound very different. They don't sound like a Sam Rosenthal record. They sound like whatever those records need to be successful for their audiences. And Rosenthal's even said this. I read an interview with him. He has a band of his own called Black Tape for a Blue Girl. And he says, I never bother my bands to be more commercial, to create a different sound. I make sure they can do whatever they want and to bring their sound out. And if I have my own impulses, I use those impulses in Black Tape for a Blue Girl. And I'm the same. I love crazy, weird things and unusual turns of phrase and unusual typographical trickery, and that's for my stuff. But I can definitely edit meat and potatoes fiction or genre hardcore fiction that is, a PI who's or an assassin who kills women, but now he's in love with his victim. That's in here. A person who's ready to kill someone who's cheating on them, a victim of a scam who wants revenge. Very commercial, very powerful, very well done fictions. While my own stuff is a little bit out there.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about that. Let's talk about the new book you have coming out this September, correct?
That's right, September 23rd. Pre-order now. It is called Calibas, which I'm shouting because there's an exclamation point. Or Another Tempest, which was a commercial consideration. I wanted to call it Calibas or The Washed Away. So Calibas is about this guy named.
Calabast?
Yeah, you got it. See, it's working. And he is the Caliban character from Shakespeare's The Tempest, which is my favorite Shakespeare play. And Calabas lives in the Farallon Islands in the future. The Farallons are small uninhabited islands here in the Bay Area. And there used to be a scientific outpost and a lighthouse was there. Now it's just birds and bird shit all over the place. But in the future, after the singularity, wouldn't you know it, a man is exiled there and he has these sort of cyborg wizardry powers through his implants, microwave, microchip implants and rehabilitative nanotechnology, that kind of thing. So Calabas is the last true human, a human like you or I, with no cyborg enhancement. But everybody else he meets, these characters like this guy Prospero, the prosperous one, and this child M, and a couple other people who wash up on the shore, are these advanced post-human creatures. And it sort of carries out the plot of Shakespeare's The Tempest. And a few years ago, it was at a low ebb. It was a low ebb emotionally, financially. Things were going really bad right before COVID. So COVID was almost a relief in some small way. Uh, and I was working at a bookstore. I'm thinking, oh man, I loved working at a bookstore. There was no money in it though, but I loved it. And I loved selling the books of my friends and my colleagues in the writing community for a long time. But I'll tell you, I'm not a perfect human being. I'm a very terrible human being in a lot of ways. So I was really grating on me at the same time, like, oh yeah, that's right. I remember I was rejecting that kid's books. I was rejecting his stories. Now look at him with his 10 books up there. Oh yeah, sure. He's a great book. Yeah, take it. And one day I was stacking the books. I was shelving Mrs. Caliban, a famous avant-garde novel that just recently come back in print. I liked that book, and oh yeah, Caliban, I like that kind of thing. And then what do you know? Maybe our mutual acquaintance Paul Tremblay, who has a story in here, by the way, had a book come out and had a movie attached to it called The Cabin in the Woods. Like, oh yeah, I'm gonna sell this shit out of this book. Cabin in the Woods. I wish I was alone in a cabin in the woods. And then an acquaintance of mine, Maria Headley, had published a new translation of Beowulf, which is like a modern or postmodern translation of the poem Beowulf. I thought, oh, what a cute little volume, Beowulf, a classic. And I thought, huh. And in the back of my mind, I was like, Caliban, Cabin in the Woods, redo a classic. And when you know, I got it. I'm going to be a bazillionaire. And so I wrote a proposal. I wrote the first few thousand words into my agent, and I said to my agent, don't tell him it's me. Make up a name. Get me out of this bookstore. As it turns out, everybody knew it was me anyway. They could just tell because I'm a distinctive writer. So the whole idea of using the pseudonym didn't quite work out. Then COVID happened, so nobody was buying books for a long time. Then I had a book come out during COVID, The Second Shooter, which you so generously blurbed. And COVID destroyed that book, sadly, because that was when the paper shortages were endemic. And the book was trapped in Denmark on a dock for a long time or in a warehouse because they had run out of cardboard boxes in the country of Denmark. So they had paper to print the book, but not to put them in the right size box to put them on a boat. So the book ended up coming out in December of 2021, which is a terrible time for any book doesn't have Santa Claus on the cover. And so that kind of flopped. So it took a while. Then just speaking of Christmas, as we were a while ago, on Christmas Eve, a longtime acquaintance of mine and a former student who has a publishing company said, I'm opening to submissions. Send me your submissions. And I sent him what I had of Caliphas and forgot about it. His co-publisher, 1 year prior, had written me on Facebook saying, hey, how are you doing? I said, oh, I'm fine. How are you? No answer. 1 year to the day later, that March, he writes back, oh, I'm fine. How are you? I'm still good. It's been a year. I'm still good. Whatever happened to that book? Somebody else bought it, right? What do you mean? Oh, we sent you an acceptance letter back in February. Never got it. It was in my trash folder in my Google account because there was an attachment on the contract was attached. So it just went to sort of the trash folder instead of the inbox. So I dug it out, sent it to my agent. And as it turns out, they'd actually accepted my book on my birthday, February 20th. So it was March 15th. So it was a month of them thinking, oh, Nick's such a big name. He's not even to say fuck off. And I'm thinking, I'm such a ruined novelist. Even these people who like me for a long time don't want my book. But actually, it was all working out fine.
Was your agent copied on that email? How did your agent not know?
I chose my agent for a very particular reason. I said, I want an agent who's not going to tell me what to do and he'll let me do whatever I want. And if something happens, he can get his 15%. And if there's any conflict, I can stand behind him like he's a wall of flesh between me and the publishers, and he can take all the body blows and the darts. That's all I want out of an agent. I'm a very independent person. So no, he was not CC'd on that
Mm,
because I figured if I get a yes, I'll tell, oh, Mike, here we go. And that's in fact what happened. But also it was like, 11:35 on Christmas Eve. I wasn't gonna CC my agent
yeah.
because I didn't want to seem that insane to him. But it all worked out.
Okay. So that book is going to be out in September. Are you doing any special incentives for pre-orders for this one?
I'm open to pitches. So if anybody's watching this for the next week or so, drop me a note. No attachments in the email. I'm supposed to go to my trash. I'll never see it. If you have any crazy ideas, if you want me to go on a boat to the Farallon Islands and take a picture of me puking because it's very choppy water out there to buy the book, I'll do that. If you want me to make you dinner, I'll do that. Whatever you want for to pre-order, I'm open for it. But
All
I'm
right.
hoping to like do events, which I've not done events in a long time because now COVID is not over. Please mask. But I will cleanse myself and gargle and put on a mask and go to a bookstore. And if it's crowded, I'll even read or do something.
Yeah.
And I'll go to East Coast, I'll go to the West Coast. I was thinking about doing a trailer for it, actually, which would involve me on the boat on the Farallon Islands, like reading Shakespeare until I vomited. Or if you pre-order, I won't do that. I'm not sure which one will get me better money.
Yeah, that'd be good. Real quick, for the last couple minutes we have you had anything, read anything, watched anything that you or listened to anything that you that you want to recommend to people?
I have a counter recommendation first.
Okay, that works.
Our Paul Tremblay was here in town a couple weeks ago. He's doing the good work of fighting against the AI companies that are consuming all of our work, like yours, mine, everybody. And so he was in SF, and his lovely wife Lisa was there. And we were walking down in Chinatown. Said, look at this nice building. It used to be owned by the best filmmaker on earth, and now it's owned by the worst filmmaker on earth. It wasn't sold. It's the same guy. But Megalopolis by Francis Ford Coppola was such a terrible movie. It pulled down the average. It made Apocalypse Now, The Godfather, Turner Man's Dream all shitty just by being exposed to him. So don't watch that. A book I enjoyed very much recently is Stoner by John Williams. It is a book from the 1960s. It is about a college professor who's sad and dies. And it's not the kind of thing that sounds all that great, but it's actually extremely well done. It reads like a 19th century novel despite being a mid 20th century novel. And it has what I perceive as an undercurrent of irony, because despite this being about a little man with his little dreams who dies sad and alone, he's actually much better off than he would have been as a dumbass farmer, which is how he started with his parents as a kid. And I think in some ways it's about the power of literature to reclaim and rehabilitate anyone. So I thought that was really good. Uh, I loved Interview with a Vampire on AMC Plus. I thought that was super good, both seasons. Eric Bogosian's a longtime favorite of mine. He is the interviewer, fantastic. I just thought that series was so great, the way it revised and updated and interrogated itself as a set of novels without just tossing what the novels were out to sea. I thought it was really well done and really beautiful. And I am very much looking forward to WrestleMania this weekend. I think it's going to be one of the best WrestleManias ever.
Yeah. And then if people want to stalk you online, where can they find you?
Blue Sky is where we are now. I still have a Twitter account, but only because every couple of days something goes viral on Facebook about a tweet that Elon Musk sent out, and 9 times out of 10 is a fake tweet. So I keep my Twitter account to make sure I can be the one who sees whether that's a true tweet or not. But on Blue Sky, I'm N Mamatas at bsky.app. Yeah, bsky.app. And that's pretty much what's open. I'm on Instagram as Concentrate and Try Again.
Yeah, where I always wonder where'd that username come from?
Which one?
The the concentrate and try again.
Oh, well, I was pretty big on Twitter for a while. And when I started on Twitter, I was big on LiveJournal. But I said to myself, I'm not going to tell anybody I'm on Twitter. I'm just going to do N Mamatas and see who finds me. And at the height, like 10,000 people found me. And then I thought, I'm going to start with Instagram and I'll do the same exact thing, but I won't even put my name in there. So Concentrate and Try Again was me trying again on social media to see if I could get an audience. And I'm not as good as Instagram because my life is not interesting.
Yeah.
So I'm not there with, on a side of a boat with my watch saying, ride or life, hashtag, and that kind of thing. I must say, what does this license plate mean? Or, oh my God, my lunch fell down and there's pizza on the ground on the sidewalk. That's most of my Instagram. And of course, the very occasional copy of 120 Murders, including my son playing guitar while I lift it like this.
Yeah. So
But Blue Sky's
I
where
will
it's at.
say, yeah, I will say for the record, I still do have my Twitter account just because I don't want to nuke it. And then like, a couple months
Somebody
later,
else
it
can take it
becomes
over
a
too. I saw some.
crypto. Yeah, it
Yeah,
becomes a crypto thing. So I kind of have it
that's right.
there. I have it made. I basically make it clear that I'm no longer active on there, but
Yeah.
yeah, because I don't want to be, yeah, I mean, Twitter's awful. So Nick, again, thanks so much for hanging out. Everybody,
Oh, my pleasure.
the newest anthology is 120 Murders. Nick has a new book coming out, which is his first new novel in, like I said, a couple years. So make sure
Yeah,
you
5 years.
pre-order that.
And it's called
Uh, I know The Tempest. I remember that part, but the
Son
other
of
part.
Us.
There we go. Okay.
All right. Thank you so much, everyone. Thanks you,
All right.
Robert.
Thanks, everyone. We'll see everyone next time. Bye.